Welcome and thank you all so much for being here to listen to our presentation today. Thank you so much to the organizers of the series for the kind invitation to share this work. I'm joining you today also from the home of, from my home on the ancestral unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And so I am going to start us off, and I'm going to try to take up maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes. I'll try to get it under 15 to give you a bit of background and context of the Dudes Club Society. And in particular, I'll describe in a little bit of detail the first evaluation that was done with Dudes. And I was brought on in the last year of a 3-year evaluation as the research manager. I started in, I think it was 2015. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that work, and then I'll invite Frank Cohn to talk about the second evaluation that he led, and which is very complementary, I think, as well to the first one. And then Teka will lead us through some information and background about NexUp, the youth initiative that is part of Dudes Club, and that came out of all of this work. So I'm hoping this is going to work. I'll share screen to get to our presentation. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'll just give you a bit of background and context to Dudes Club, talk about the evaluation, which was sponsored by Movember Canada and was part of a UBC men's health project. It was one of a number of projects between 2013 and 2016. I'll talk about some of the findings and share some quotes that I think are very powerful and really illustrate the importance of Dudes Club. So Dudes Club started almost 12 years ago at Vancouver Native Health Society. And it was co-founded by Dr. Paul Gross and community member Richard Johnson at Vancouver Native Health Society. And, you know, it really came out of a need that was expressed by a lot of men, that there was a lot of programming that they saw for women and for children, but there wasn't really a lot directly aimed at men. And they, you know, there was a strong feeling that this was a big need in the neighborhood. And so there was also a desire to bring health to where the men were at, you know, instead of having them have to leave the neighborhood to get healthcare, potentially going somewhere where healthcare professionals didn't understand the realities that they face day to day. They wanted to bring it to where the men were at. So at the time, there were lots of successful HIV support programs at Vancouver Native Health Society, and Dudes was kind of built upon that success. So initially, it started out as a group for people living with HIV and AIDS, but due to the immense success that they had in the first 6 months of the program, it was open to all men in the community. So there was, at the beginning, you know, there were kind of these 3 pillars that were developed that came out of Dudes Club. The first was to build the sense of solidarity and brotherhood between members of the club. The second was to promote men's health through education, dialogue, and health clinics. And the third was to enable men to regain a sense of pride, purpose, and fulfillment. So the members collectively developed these pillars to anchor the program really in a strengths-based approach to health and wellness. So what the structure of the program as it evolved was there were meetings that were held every 2 weeks. There was always an elder connected with the program who opened and closed the meeting with a prayer and a circle. There were all sorts of different activities. Bingo, haircuts, watching sports, etc. There was always something connected to it. And there were always health professionals present to provide information. And sometimes there were, you know, other services that were offered, like social workers and nurses. Always a meal is shared together, and the men are always waited on. They don't have to line up for any of, you know, any of the food, which is actually a really key point and a really important thing. And then I'll talk about this in a minute, the different pilot sites that developed, but each of the different sites had, you know, different meetings and different topics and activities, but they all involve an elder, activities, and food. And I just wanted to share a couple of the pictures of our elders who were part of especially the original sites, including Henry Charles, who's now passed over. His picture is bottom left. Rod George, who was in the Prince George pilot site. Sandy Lambert is the top right, and he's still with the Vancouver Dudes Club. And Steve Mons, or Pops, who was with the Smithers site. So those are the important elders. So as I mentioned, health education was always a big part of Dudes Club. So the presence of a health professional was consistent in the Vancouver Dudes Club. There was always the doctor, and there used to be a clinical counselor. In Smithers, there was a public health nurse who regularly attended. They would bring in guest speakers around topics like nutrition, grief, things that healthcare professionals might not feel experienced enough to talk about. So they would always bring in somebody. The health fair was a really important event. And it was just, when it started, it was a giant screening clinic, basically, to try to get the men in to address issues that they wouldn't otherwise at all feel comfortable addressing. And those have been really, really important and popular over the years. And again, and I'll talk about this as well a little bit later, that the topics, it's just a huge range of topics. And over 12 years, you can imagine there's a lot talked about. In fact, a lot of the dudes could probably teach about some of these topics, because they've gotten so much knowledge and information that they also pass on to others. But things like bone health or mental health topics, spiritual health conversations led by elders, it runs a big range. So the evaluation, which, as I said, was sponsored by Movember, there was sort of 3 phases. The first was a program evaluation, which was throughout over the course of the 3 years. It was also intended to support the establishment of pilot sites in northern BC. Initially at Morristown, which is now called Whitsett, in a Wet'suwet'en community near Smithers, one in Smithers itself, and then one in Prince George. The third phase was to develop an online toolkit, which I know Teka will talk about more later, which is now called a knowledge bundle. And then the study design was really mixed methods. There was a survey that was designed to assess the benefits derived from the Dudes Club. And that was conducted in person, face-to-face with the men. And there were also 14 focus groups, interviews with participants, program providers, elders, and healthcare providers. And it was really a collaborative approach throughout the entire evaluation. There were many trips that were taken to the pilot sites. As it evolved, we included members of the Dudes Club who were interested in the research. We made sure to present at the meetings. We included elders in the process of analysis. So we really involved everybody in our approach. This just gives you a little overview of the demographics as they were, in 2016. A majority, over 2/3 of the men are over 40 years old, with the mean age being 46.8. Lots of unstable housing, over half had experienced unemployment. There was, and this wasn't very surprising, given especially, I think, the history of urban, the development of the urban Indigenous community, which was really founded on volunteer work, but 40%, volunteer graded over more than 10 hours a week. So there's a huge culture of volunteerism in the community. And while many of the men, over half the men, had children, very few of them actually lived with their children. So, there was also the, family connection and family status was really important. And again, a majority were also Indigenous who participated in Dudes Club. With the survey work, the program satisfaction scores were extremely high. The scores indicate that, members were really satisfied with the program, and it was based on a 5-point Likert scale. So, it's just a little snapshot of how important this program was at that time. I'm going through some of this really quickly because I want to leave a lot of time for the more recent material and to hear about NexUp as well. But I'm always happy to share further in the Q&A if there's more specific questions. This just really showed that, again, it's based on the scales to assess the outcomes through our quantitative data. But we see that, the men who attended frequently were doing fairly well. And this, is across the spectrum of all the measured outcomes. And again, I won't spend much time on it, but just, the fact that the men who attended more often had these higher health outcomes was very clear. So just to share a little bit about, some of the quotes. These are based on our focus groups and interviews. So some of the things that came out was really around health knowledge. So one of the Dudes Club members talked about, how important it was for the doctor who was present to talk about their medication, to let them know what's new, what's coming out, what to take, what to not take. And this was a really important finding that was also reinforced by the healthcare providers who participated. One of the nurses said, a member of Dudes coming in and saying, what is this, before they take it. So she describes this as being conscientious enough to know that there's nurses in the building that they can go talk to. So there was this raising of awareness and knowledge that actually led a lot of the men to sort of start to question what it was that they were taking and whether there was something better, or whether, take control really of their health in a more fulsome way. Health behavior was another huge thing. And I think this is also really connected to that health fair and creating the spaces of safety, as I'll talk about in a moment, that encourage men to actually seek out, tests and appointments and things that they would have in the past not even thought about doing. So one of the Dudes Club members said, yeah, I went to screening, I did the test, I do my blood test more regularly because, down here you never know. And a nurse said that, I would have to say from my perspective, the guys I know coming to Dudes are more likely to go to their doctor than not. So you can just really see that the difference that it was making in terms of being presented with the information and actually not just being presented with the information, but leading to that, that actual behavior change. And of course, the feeling of empowerment. So one of the Dudes Club members said, the club empowers people to take the information. We may save a life. And a nurse said, I don't believe the individual going there from our clientele would feel empowered. So going into the health clinic is what they're saying. I don't think they would have any autonomy or any of that, but I think at our center, that is specifically with the Dudes, they have that. So there was just the sense that through the information they were getting, in the space that they were getting it, that this was actually leading to a different sense of control and of ownership over their own health. So it leads me to, just briefly describe like, why does it work? And I think, one of the most important, one of the key findings, I think, was around safety and trust. And the fact that, these spaces are confidential, the fact that there's a code of conduct, and that it's a safe space to talk about things that sometimes the men have never talked about before, that there are strong peer relationships, that many are friends and they keep the confidentiality within that setting, but they maintain these friendships outside and keeping each other in the loop and respectful listening, and very, very low barrier space as well, and a very supportive space. The location, and this became really clear through our work with the pilot sites, particularly in Prince George. Anybody who knows that area, that there's been like long time issues with downtown, and the location of Dudes Club emerged as a really important factor in terms of how men feel, whether they feel they can maintain that confidentiality or access or feel safe. So having a location that is on their own turf, having healthcare professionals who understand the reality was really important. and the presence of elders. Always the presence of elders is just so important. And so, one of the Dudes Club elders said that we have men that have, been sexually abused, who've gone through drug abuse and everything. Some are survivors of boarding schools, and they will talk with us. They feel Dudes Club is a safe haven. The presentation of health information in a way that is non-hierarchical, right? That is, first names are used, there's, joking, there's personal sharing. And this is really challenging because this is, runs counter to a lot of what the system requires of health professionals in terms of the time that you need to take in developing those relationships. And so recognizing that this is really what, what Dudes Club, what the men found in terms of participating in these meetings. There is easy to understand language was really important. Any jargon that's used is explained, and that there is no rush, that they can take their time chatting about health issues. There's not these time limits that are, constantly imposed. And one of the members, says, I find a lot of doctors don't care about people's health down here. And he actually cares about you, it's different there. And he's talking about the doctor that regularly attended at the Dudes Club meetings. And then finally, this is the last slide. So just the fact that these spaces are really, as one of the Dudes Club members said, we once had this discussion about management, about executive decisions, how decisions are made within the club, and they don't make them. In other words, Vancouver Native Health Society or whoever is hosting that space, they don't make them. It says by us, about us, and for us. So, it's their choice. There's, and I know that Frank and Teka will probably also talk to this, that there are regular think tank meetings where the topics are decided. They bring in their own knowledge, their street knowledge, whatever types of knowledge they have. And that it's really open, like there's no taboo topics. The healthcare professionals answer any questions that they might have. And I love this one quote from one of the elders. He once said, we talk about everything from bones to boners. And this was after a session that, there was a discussion about bone health and erectile dysfunction. Like there was no off limits, and it was really what the men wanted to hear. So I think that self-determination is really vital to the effectiveness of the program. Everybody does their own things, but there are these kind of core values to Dudes Club that I think make it very powerful, that the ownership and the obligations that are presented to that. So that's me. That's what I just wanted to give you a bit of that grounding in what we found and the evaluation. And I'll pass it over to Frank or Teka, whoever is going to speak next to. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lyana, and welcome everyone. It's good to see so many names and quite a few faces. And my name's Frank. I'm here in Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and honored to be here. And I'll add a little bit on to what Lyana shared, and then I'll try to pass quite quickly over to you, Teka, as you walk us through NexUp and the core of the discussion for today. As Lyana shared, we did that evaluation back in 2013 to 2016, a 3-year study. We then grew our work based on that in very significant ways. We developed a new partnership with First Nations Health Authority in 2016. And with the FNHA, specifically the Northern region, we began working in many additional communities. And by the end of 2017, early 2018, we all of a sudden found that we were in almost 40 communities around BC, and we were getting requests from outside of BC as well. So our work, if we have to encapsulate it in a quick little soundbite, is about reducing social isolation. We know from the research, we know from our experience, if we can do that, if we can connect people, then their health improves. Simple, basic. People wonder often, how do you guys do what you do? And we tell them it's really, really straightforward. Unfortunately, there's been so many barriers historically, legally, policy-wise, related to the colonial project that have disrupted that. But if we can restore those connections to oneself, and that goes into all kinds of deep questions around self-esteem and empowerment, to our physical and mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, to family, from whom we are often separated for a variety of reasons, to the land from which we have often been forcibly displaced, to our culture, to our community, and to our ancestors. So many men have been disconnected from these, and we do everything we can to restore that balance. In 2017, we also partnered with the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. So with those two new partnerships in place, First Nations Health Authority and Canadian Men's Health Foundation, we started to grow a lot more and develop more relationships with more health authorities. And fast forward to where we are today in, 2022? We are now in almost 60 communities supporting men's wellness in different ways, whether they have an official dudes club or whether they have a men's group that goes by another name that uses some of our tools and joins our trainings, participates in our coaching sessions, connects with our elders and our outreach team. Thanks to federal government, we've also had some funds that we've been able to use to support communities directly as well. And so we're in a few places outside of BC, but still mostly in BC and still mostly in the north. But I see people joining from all over. We don't have a group in Nelson, I'm sorry, but we do have groups: Prince George, Prince Rupert, Fort St. John, Quesnel, Houston, and expanding out into Chilliwack and into the Fraser Valley with some very interesting relationships, sometimes directly with the nations and sometimes more directly with either the health authorities or the FNHA. If we can jump to the next slide, please. And this is a beautiful group of our beautiful guys from all over. Unfortunately, seeing this, the first thing that I see is three of our men who have passed on, and who brought so much to us and to our community and to their peers, and just knowing that there are more guys out there like these guys, whether they're young guys or old guys. Very often it's the old guys, but it goes both ways, who are not finding space to find those connections. And their knowledge, their traditional learning, their experience, their language, their culture is disappearing with them. And that's something that when I look at these faces in this picture, I'm just so starkly reminded of how important it was that space was created for them to come in and share that. And if we can jump to the next slide. This shows some of the locations where we've been active. Beautiful locations. We're incredibly lucky to be able to do this work and to connect with communities in these places. And happy to answer questions directly if people have. I'll be monitoring the chat while Dega's jumping into his slides. And if we can go to the next. And yeah, our values and our vision. This is what really guides our work. And, we envision, again, to keep it as simple as possible, that people who identify as men have restored or improved connections. We recognize that this is a very long journey and that this work will never be fully complete. Our job at some point will be complete, we feel, if health authorities and all of those responsible for health are taking into account the very specific needs of men's wellness and the very specific historical realities that have led to the disruptions in wellness that we see today. We can jump to the next one, which is our values. And this really just underpins and guides our work. Relationships is core. All that we do is relational. Creating sanctuary. And we don't often think about this when we think about men, because we think, well, we live in a patriarchal society. Aren't men already safe? Well, patriarchy doesn't work for all men. And in a lot of ways, it doesn't work for any men, but it certainly doesn't work for men who are experiencing various intersectional marginalizations or exclusions. So creating that sanctuary where culture is safe, where spaces of no judgment, and that can be really, really challenging. because we've all got things that that are in our past, and that that we are judged for, and that in some spaces maybe we should be judged for. But our space is specifically focused on non-judgment. If you're in a bad way today, if you're not doing well, we'll see you tomorrow, or we'll see you next week. That's why consistency is really core with our community, because we'll be here next week. And you know, if you need to take some space and cool down, we'll be here next week, and no judgment for what happened last week. Brotherhood is another essential component, and I'll just read there: the healthy, authentic, humble, and courageous masculinities core to our work. So redefining how we think about brotherhood as well. So yes, brotherhood, but not so much on the hey bro kind of side. And we recognize that this work is long, slow work. It's a journey, and healing doesn't happen overnight. It has to come from and be done with the individuals who are going through the process themselves. Happens over time. And we are incredibly lucky in so many ways that we live in a space where we do have access to multiple cultural viewpoints, multiple health-centered or medical viewpoints, and multiple ways to approach wellness. And so as much as possible, we aim to support men's wellness with a holistic practice, prioritizing Indigenous learnings and Indigenous wellness, and whatever that means for people from their specific region and nation, which somebody coming from Gittinyao is going to have an incredibly different experience than someone coming from Musqueam territory or anywhere else in the country. We know that this work is most needed in certain areas of our country, and unfortunately we're not able to be in all of those areas now, including Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec. We recognize the need is tremendous there. We work, in addition to working in communities, we also work in the prison system. And the prisons that we work in Northern BC have 80% Indigenous identifying inmates. In Saskatchewan, those numbers climb to almost 100%. Same is true for the disproportionality of the child welfare system. I will now put on my NexUp hat, which is powered by Dudes Club, and turn it over to my colleague Tega, and we've got one of our beautiful young men here helping us to make that transition.
Niao, Frank, and thank you. What Conor so what we're going to get seats in your jets, Kanya Kahaga, Ganogarona, Midawaganyo. My name is Dagatsi Teka Everstz. I belong to the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk people of Kahnawake. I'm Bear Clan, and I'm within the capacity of Dudes Club Society. I'm co-director in this work, and have been really honored and gifted to help launch the youth response strategy to Dudes Club Society. If we can jump to slide 25, please. So back in I believe it was 2020, the end of 2020, there was a lot of conversation in and around the work that we do, and in that space, there was an identified need to begin focusing our efforts not only on the men, which in that space, our median age is 42 years. What we did notice is that there was a lack of youth engagement and youth connection to the work that we did. And again, a really great analogy in and around that work is, we have to be holistic and be very mindful of the generations. It's like cleaning up, mopping up a wet floor when the pipe is broken in the wall. So we began looking at ways to transform the work that we do at Dudes Club Society into a youth-led response, and hence the development of NexUp. The word NexUp was a play on the next generation coming, the next leadership, the next champions that we'll have in our community and in Dudes Club Society. And one of the specific pieces, if we can jump to slide, I would say jump, we can jump to the next slide. one of the pieces in and around our work was to understand that there is a change in conversation, in relationships, in understanding what men's health is. One of the big pieces that we are seeing is gender expression, gender identities and sexualities. And what we are seeing is having a lot of youth and in community and in urban settings come in and wanting to learn more about how they could redefine or re-understand or reimagine men's health. One of the significant pieces that we find is having trans community, where in our community having Indigenous aunties or having anti-knowledge, anti-culture is significant just as much as having uncle and having that knowledge as an uncle. So now it is part of incorporated into the work that we do, is that how do we support our community members who are now coming to a space of being an uncle and understanding that that is men's health, that world that they live in is men's health as well. So it's navigating into some really interesting spaces that as in the same kind of impetus or ethos that Dudes Club Society has, it's community-led. So NexUp is in essence youth-led within the community. Can we jump to the next slide? And the most important piece around the work that we do is listening, learning, and adapting the work or design that we do to create more engagement, create safer spaces for all community members in how they interact with our society in this initiative. Next slide. So some of the work that we do specifically is develop promotional material and in engagement, speak around health awareness, not just within community, but local issues that pertain to youth specifically, and have them guide the work and the design and the overall approach that the society takes to engage the community directly. And so this is just a list of some of the offerings and work that we do directly with community. One of the biggest pieces that we found incredible success with is the connection to elders, knowledge keepers, and cultural knowledge and medicines through branded programming or through branded activities and events that we host and or partnered projects that we do, which we'll speak to in just a moment. Next slide. So in similar fashion to the core values that Dudes Club Society has, we brought together youth to kind of identify the core values of Dudes Club Society and say, how do we reimagine this? How do we create more fun and more engagement into that space? And it was kind of narrowed down into 4 core areas, movement, and we can jump to the next slide as we move forward. Movement was really understanding that no matter what we do, there's different activities. Body movement, being physically, mentally aware of your body is a great nexus point for us to talk about health. Now, I want to be very mindful that the work that we do is health by stealth. We keep, try to keep away from having a circle and saying, okay, we're going to talk about certain, prostate cancer. Youth aren't going to sit into, in a circle and kind of like focus in on the work. So we have to look for ways that we can adapt fun activities and engagement, and then our facilitators and coordinators work along with our youth to introduce topics and have it organically brought out through conversation. And that's really the core of what we do. So movement is one of the pieces. Create is another way of understanding for us. Any base of art or engagement design has a significant amount of healing and reflection and activity, storytelling that invites individuals, invites participants to come into a space and create safety through, exploring stories, sharing their own experiences. And one of the critical pieces in and around the work that we do is that we have an elder in residence who is really the foundation or the roots to ensuring that we have a sense of safety. Those elders are often a combination of elder and counselor. Our sister organization, who we work closely with, is IRSSS, Indian Residential School Survivor Society, works really close to support us, and we're noticing a lot of our youth in their youth justice system are transferring over to our initiatives and back and forth. And I think a lot of that has to do with the approach that we take in creating safer spaces and exploring in different formats rather than just sitting down and talking about the topic directly. Next slide, please. Grounding is a significant piece of the work that we do, and understanding that, walking on the grass, playing in the field, going swimming, hanging out at the beach, going for, a spirit bath has a major input or impact on the health benefits or health outcomes of individuals. So understanding how we can incorporate engagement on the land, more importantly, taking these youth out of their urban setting or out of their own community and going onto land, and understanding the importance of how that's related to traditional medicines, food sovereignty, and reconnecting themselves and culture. It really does come through, connection to the land. Next slide. And our last pillar is connecting through community, creating advocacy awareness, and helping bring into light the leadership that each of our youth have, and trying to identify where and how they want to engage community, they want to engage with their voice, create facilitation, and really describe what their healing looks like. And what, the goal of the work that we do is to transition our youth who are coming in to hang out and have a good time into the next facilitation or leaders or facilitators for NexUp. And really, it's the aspect of moving ourselves out of the way so that it is youth-led, it's youth-designed, and it's youth-driven in that space. So as we move forward, these are just a few pictures of some of the initiatives that we have. And I do believe Rai has joined us.
Yes, hi.
If you just want to share a little bit around in your work with NexUp.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Sorry that I'm late to the call. Just juggling a few different jobs, as I'm sure many of us do. Yeah, my name's Rai. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. I'm a settler on these territories. I have Scottish, English, and Italian ancestry. I was born on the traditional homelands of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, and I've been out on the Coast Salish territories, and grateful to be residing on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And yeah, I'm the program coordinator and NexUp coordinator with Dudes Club Society, and I've been working with them for over a year. I also work for the YWCA and facilitate a program called Dating Safe in high schools on dating violence prevention. And I also actually coordinate and help facilitate the men's circle on campus at UBC under the Sexual Assault Support Center and the Healthier Masculinities Club. So yeah, grateful to be here. I hope that you've been enjoying some of the learnings and teachings around what Dudes Club and NexUp is doing. And I'm happy to share some of my perspectives. Just really briefly, the main thing I think we do is create a space where cisgender boys and young men, as well as two-spirit folks and trans folks and non-binary people and gender-nonconforming people, can gather together to talk about masculinities and do that work collectively. And I think that's something quite rare. And in my experience working in schools and community centers in men's health and as well as in gender-based violence prevention, I don't see that happen that much, where we're kind of in this transition phase between a gender binary model into a more inclusive kind of gendered space where we can still do this work and talk about masculinity and talk about patriarchy and talk about colonialism and the gender binary as rooted in systems of white supremacy and violence and oppression, but unpack those things together in a space that's more welcoming and inclusive, and learn from each other in a space where our experiences come out. And for the most part, I think we've been very successful in that at NexUp. And from my experience connecting with the participants and the young people that are coming into those spaces, we get a lot of really beautiful feedback, especially from gender nonconforming youth or trans youth who are really seeking out spaces to explore masculinity or deconstruct masculinity, and do that in a space that feels safe and welcoming and fun. And I think that's, if I could say anything, in 3 minutes, I think that's the biggest point that I take away from what we do. And some of those moments have been really beautiful to experience with other people, and in my own gender journey of kind of also, challenging the ways that I was raised and the way that I was brought up to conform to certain masculinities and certain gender roles that don't fit with me and don't work with me. And, to be able to do my work in a place like Dudes Club Society and in a place like NexUp, where youth who have similar experiences and different experiences than me can come together and kind of do that work together. It's really, really beautiful. I'm really grateful to be a part of that.
Thank you.
I think that's all I'll say.
Thank you. And Lyana, you can continue just moving on to the slides as we talk. I understand that it is kind of question and answer session. And as we're kind of going into that space, there are several slides that just showcase some of the events, and specifically events and our approach to connecting with youth through social media, through really high level professional designs and engagement and incredible facilitators. And I guess one of the last pieces, just real quick, that I'd like to bring note to is the evaluation of the work that we do. We are, 1 year into NexUp, and we are just on the brink of, I believe this Sunday is our first evaluation survey for our youth division of work. So this is now taking on another aspect of the health impacts associated to the next generation of youth, and setting a baseline in and around the work that we're doing to feed into the research. 12 years of impacts that Dudes Club Society has had. We're now able to see and follow our youth through from an earlier age up to their transition point into Dudes Club Society. So we're really excited about how we can see the long-term effects associated to Dudes Club initiatives and our youth strategy.